Hello guys, so today I'm going to create an orange out of not a UV sphere, but a cube. So mesh, add cube. I'm going to subdivide that, control 3, turn on my shortcut keys display so you can see what I'm doing while I do it. So I'll just set that up in a sec. It's important to set that up because that's helpful for seeing exactly what I'm doing, what I'm pressing. So per usual, just like any of my other streams, I'm going to first of all, let's add a cast modifier on here so that it's more sphere-like. So I'll keep that at 0, just to make sure that when it smooths out, it's a true sphere. So this is at 0. Let's try 2. So notice that subtle difference. Because this is a subdivided cube, smoothing doesn't smooth it as much as you might want to get a sphere. So shade smooth. Let's do that again with it selected. So I'm using spacebar for my lookup, but your shortcut might be F3 instead. That was just a personal preference that I set for myself under Edit Preferences. So I'm going to start out going into cycles, and I'm going to set up a material for this, and because I'm in cycles, there's a setting down here that's very important, and that's displacement. So displacement only. Displacement bump doesn't do exactly what you think it does. It's not related to the bump shading on your material. I think it displays your displacement as a bump material instead. So right here, I'm just going to put out some lights so we have something to see. I'm going to bring up my shader editor. The way the sphere won't show up without lights, unless we have use an emissive material. For example, these texture coordinates. So this is emissive because it's sending out light, or it doesn't have surface reflection data, or any of these qualities. So with this object, I'm going to separate. I'm going to create this inner section so that when there's a cross section, you can see all the way through it. And I'm going to go a little bit non-shader node-y by using a cube as a boolean. So with this, I'm going to add another modifier, so boolean, and sample this cube because it's set to difference. When it cuts through, it won't show. So in the viewport, I'm going to set that viewport display to wire so we can see that. And then in render view, I'm going to change the shader to translucent shader. So go to surface and then transparent. So now the cube isn't shown. We can actually go ahead and hide that, and I'm just going to focus on this cross section because it's kind of in the middle, so that's going to be the most extreme case. Nice thing about spheres, like we can control that because we can get a radial gradient and a spherical one. So let me show you spherical right here. So it emits from the center, and just like the spherical gradient, the radial gradient also emits from the center. Because object coordinate, it's important to know that 0 is at that center, and then 1 is out here. So 1 is the extent of the gradient. when you map things. And here generated, it's from top to bottom, from one corner to the other. So they're similar, but that's one of the main differences between the two. And so to create this imprint, there's sections here. I'm saying they're about 5. They're 5 on each side, so that's 10. So I'm going to work to create that pattern. So I'm going to first start by adding symmetry to this. So subtract by 0.5 or add by negative 0.5, same thing. And then with another math node, use the absolute value, because negative to positive creates a reflection mathematically. And then I want to repeat that, so we're going to use multiply, and we're going to use an operation called modulo, which sets a cutoff point where it starts repeating. In programming, like in Python, that number is %. So I'm going to make that 1, so every time it passes 1, the number 1, it's going to cut off. And because this gradient goes from 0 to 1, it's always going to repeat every time. And so I can just set that to 10, and there should be 10 sections here. Yeah. And so how do we combine this with here to get this? How do we get that smooth angle? Well, there's a math node for smoothing. Go to smooth minimum, and we can take 2 values and then decide how much to smooth it. So I'm going to use the black and white values right here instead, and just going to move that up there so it's easier to read. It's not crossing through a bunch of nodes. Yeah, and make sure these are both in the value. So, and here, I don't want that color node in there. Yep. So that fixes that. And then you can see when I sample this, so this Control-Shift-Click, I can view any node. So another important hotkey. So we're getting this when we combine the two. Let's try swapping them. All right. So what I'm going to do is put a gradient on this gradient texture. It's called a color ramp, so you can just adjust these values here. And it looks like the outermost parts are darker, so I'm going to bring that in until this has disappeared, and then I'm going to add another one to adjust that curvature. Now we have something pretty close to what we want here. Of course, the white is black here, and the orange is, and the white section here is the orange. So I'm going to actually bring this in a little bit more, just to make it, because there's a little rim around it, and for that, so for the center we want to make that. That's eventually going to be that white material. So I'm actually going to make that black because this is just a mask for that. Yeah, and then so I'll adjust that until we have a nice center there. And that's not the slope it wants. Just bring these closer. So yeah, there's the orange, and yeah, and we can create an outer mask just with the gradient, this gradient. So let's make the two materials. Actually going to have 3. So this outer bumpy, the skin, and then the this inner, and then that. Yeah. So to do that, I'm going to make this orange, turn up the saturation, up the value. We can see a preview of this in the neutral light right here, so you can refer to that. Subsurface is a slightly, if we look through this. See, there's kind of like a yellowish subsurface scattering on, so maybe like a light yellow, yeah, like that. So we can see that there. So it's kind of making it more waxy-ish quality, or if you think about human skin, you know. And yep, and then we're gonna add a bump node. So bump is based on height, and then it creates a slope from that, and then that's how it creates the illusion of detail. So it's good to keep in mind, just looking at this gray value, the dark parts are going to be lowest and the white parts are going to be highest. So if we look at this, we can actually make this position, because this is independent of the geometry. If we move this around, it's actually 3D. You can see that more if at a smaller level. Yeah, so that's kind of a cool effect. And for that reason, I'm going to use that for most of the textures on this. So on this, we have, it's kind of a layer of bumps. So there's the most prominent bumps are the ones that go inwards, and then there's softer bumps on top of that. And to do that, I'm going to create another texture. So this is the one that's going to go on top. And I'm going to use a color ramp. So, and we'll make these a bit smaller, and then flip the color ramp, and then change it to ease, and so I'm going to add this to it. So now we have this. Let's see. And actually, I think it would, and right now I'm making the mistake of plugging to this normal, so I actually want to plug that into strength, or height, it's the one. And so we can see this here. I think the bump's a bit strong. We can smooth it out by adjusting the distance. So now the top bump is kind of prominent, so we can sharpen that bump with this color ramp. So I'm sampling that with Control-Shift-Click. Yeah, so let's bring that in. And smooth F1 could give us more gradient, make it more natural to work with. It's all about just the type of texture that you want. So yeah, this top bump is too much, so we'll turn it down. This add node. So the add node is making it sit directly on top of the other bump detail. Yeah, so this is looking kind of reddish, and it's because of this radius. So this corresponds to RGB, even though this is a length. So let's bring up the green, because green makes things more yellow. So when you see yellow on a screen, it's a combination of red and green, actually. So yeah, now that we have a sort of complex material, it's taking a while longer to render, especially with subsurface. I find that this kind of gives you a slow result. I'm going to add a environment texture so that we can get some better lighting. So I've recently downloaded material. Just give some more even lighting. It's more realistic to have different lighting coming from different angles. Yeah, so if we look at the material, probably turn this down. Let's try turning off subsurface. Just kind of slowing things down right now. We can actually get a quicker approximation if we go into EV. So now we can see what this actually looks like. Yeah, I don't like these sharp lines, so let's see if we can get a better result with smooth F1. And yeah, I'm liking that more. Let's lower this value so it's not as sharp. Let's try V-spline. So that kind of allows the gradient to continue past that part. If we make that and then bring that out, we can sort of create a larger bump there. Let's adjust this again. Maybe we should just make that a little more subtle. Let's tighten this up. Of course, this spooling shift over a little bit, so covers all that. Now, if I look at this, we can. Ultimately, this is going to be the outer shell of it, so I'm just going to instead use another gradient from the sphere. So, yeah, so this one. So if I think about it, yeah, so I'm just going to have that material end at the edge. There's a pretty fine edge in real life, so I guess that's okay to do. Let's try 1.9. Right, and yeah, so we put these all the materials together with mix shaders. So this is going to go in right here. And let's just see. Let me think. I'm gonna do a slightly different approach right here. So I'm actually gonna have the color drive this. So it's gonna be driven by the gradient and also the roughness. And then I'm gonna use the bump for all of it. I think I'll get a pretty nice result. I mean, the bump doesn't exist here, and it is lesser on here on this section, but I think this will be good. So obviously we don't need that node anymore. So now we can control that. There's a little more yellow in this. There's some, variation. Like some fruits are more, some oranges are more yellow than others. Okay, so far I haven't been using displacement. I don't think I'm going to for this anyway. So I guess I'm just fine working in Eevee in this case. Whatever gets the best result. So again, we created this alpha earlier. We're going to finally use that over here. I think I'd like to make this a sharp difference, but maybe incorporate some of that bump into the material. So first I'm going to so if we look in here, you have the two materials. Yeah, so this should go into the factor. And use a less than greater than, again, to create the sharp line, just like we did to create the other mask. And decrease that, so that's going to be where our material will show up. And then I don't like that slope right there, so maybe we can adjust this gradient. Is this a little better? Just bring it in a little. Maybe one in between. So just get a little gear. So that's the size of that. Let's try ease. We'll get better results. And then yeah, this should be closer to white than it should be to black, I think, is the problem. Nope. Wait. This should be. Okay, let's remove one of these. Some more complicated. Just that. Alright, so Cardinal's given the result I want. And that'll give him, I think, more curve gradient right here, which is nice. Yeah, so we'll plug this bump into this height into a bump map into bump node over here, so vector bump. So Shift A to add vector bump. And then just plug that into height. Right here, it'll show on the whole material. We're just testing this out. So there's the sharp line here. We can try to smooth that out with distance. And yeah, and now we can add how it's squashing in there. It's going to be the most experimental part of this. So if I have a Veroni texture, again, Veroni, you know, is helpful for creating cellular things, and a lot of things have that shape, so that kind of works. I'm just going to plug it in texture coordinates so that we can approach that. So right here, if we squish it, can try normalize. Squeeze it in, and then maybe scale. It's not working exactly in the way we want. Let's try changing the order. Yeah. And like, as you can see, there's a lot more in the center because that area is going to be masked out. It'll be harder to see, but yeah, I guess it isn't ideal. Yeah, so, but I'm just going to use this since this is just, you know, I'm kind of low on time. Need to be available by 8 o'clock, so so yeah, so that's looking, you know, pretty close. Of course, this Veroni I forgot to flip, so I can do color invert. So that'll just turn black into white and white into black, so the highs to the lows. And then maybe I can, you know, add and multiply just to adjust it. So with the math node. So that's convert and then math. It's important to look at this from far away so we can see what it's going to feel like. And then, oh yeah, so one thing I forgot about Veroni is that you can adjust the smoothness, so that'll be helpful for that. How about I add a little bit of distortion in there because it's kind of messy. This is kind of organized, so a quick way to do that. So I'm gonna use linear light, and that basically shifts the vectors over the position of all the texture, and then by whatever texture I add to it, but then subtracts by negative. So for plain value, it's not, you see it's just shifting things. But for this noise texture, when I add that to it, it's going to distort using that. It's helpful because it shifts things and then subtracts by the amount that it's adding, which is 0.5. So, which makes sure that things don't shift while they're warping. Like it's shifting, but it's not like trending in one extra direction. Like if I were to do this with add, do a similar thing. but it's slowly, the center's slowly shifting over here, so it should be staying right there. And then, so the same thing in linear light is just to subtract this right here. Yeah. So I'm just gonna adjust the detail here. So we don't really want a whole lot of detail, unless we were to increase the scale of this. So then we actually do get like more interesting variation than if we were just going to use scale and then not add detail. Because then you have multiple levels of noise, because that's basically what all that it's adding is. Yeah, so there's that. And if we want in this bump, I'm gonna add this gradient right here. Oh, well, this one. Let's see what happens if I just do smooth maximum. Okay, good to know. So I think if I just take maybe just the sphere and I add that to the center. Oh. Yeah, scratch that. I think that's just gonna ask for a mess. So yeah, here we have this. We can make this shinier, turn up the roughness, turn down. Of course, this needs to be more saturated. So H is a V is hue, saturation, and value. So that's why it's helpful to kind of fine tune that type of thing. And so we can mess with that, turn down the roughness. And roughness is related to the detail parameter. They just kind of feed off of each other. But if you don't have detail, you can't have more smaller detail going off of that. And roughness is a smaller detail within detail. Yeah, so there's a pretty nice orange. You know, one thing we could do to spice all this up is connect all these. So for all of these, I'm using the object. So I guess I'm using position for this because I wanted it to radiate from there. But so I can plug this into here just so it's coming from the same position, and that'll be nice because then I can add these two together. So shift, right click and drag, link to those, and then I can just add a linear light. Let's use a Musgrave texture. So that's like noise, except it has direction. It's just a different pattern of noise, and for a slightly different reason. So right there it's shifting. Let's change the scale. You know, just enough to make it feel more natural. Right here we're just missing this little piece on top. I think I'm just gonna leave that out for this tutorial since I'm short on time. But I'm just gonna focus this last part on this driver. Okay, so interesting. So with this black center right there. That's related to this mask. So this shader we don't really even need this mix shader anymore. So we use that gradient just for the color. So just gonna bring that over there and yeah, bring that back in the output. Let's adjust this again. So yeah, and it sharpens out some parts of it. I guess we could, if we just use the position for that. Yeah. Let's I think I'm gonna call it for this tutorial, but you know, I hope this, you know, is helpful and inspiring. Like, it doesn't need to be perfect. My goal is just to do something every day, so just want to keep it simple. We can see like the power of having these procedural textures. Like this is a case where it'd be kind of useful to have, because we can't really accomplish this with just texture painting. I think this is a result of the texture distortion I added at the end. So, yeah, pretty cool. Alright guys, thanks for watching. Have a great day.